The Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. The committee is meeting today to receive testimony on oversight of the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. The Committee on Homeland Security is meeting today to conduct oversight of the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General. Established as part of DHS in 2002, Inspector General's mission is to provide independent oversight and promote excellence, integrity, and accountability within the department. Unfortunately, the OIG has faced challenges for some time. The Government Accountability Office audited the OIG in 2014 and found it needed to fill key senior positions, address concerns about integrity and independence, develop a process to protect the identities of those making complaints, and improve coordination and information sharing with law enforcement authorities. In 2017 and 2018, the OIG removed from its website 13 reports from inaccurately painted the Federal Emergency Management Agency's disaster response efforts in a favorable light. I said at that time the OIG must fully restore confidence in its work, and the committee would be monitoring its progress. Unfortunately, the hope for progress has not been realized. In 2019, Inspector General Kafari was confirmed. Since then, the committee has received several complaints from OIG employees about management of the office. Specifically, employees have alleged that failure to develop, implement, and adhere to management policies has resulted in decisions that are arbitrary, show favoritism or bias, hurt morale, and negatively affect operations. In response to these allegations and continued concerns about the performance of the office, in December 2019, bipartisan leadership of this committee and the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee asked GAO to review DHS's OIG management and operations. After a comprehensive audit, GAO issued a draft report last week to the OIG and the committee on its preliminary findings and made 21 recommendations. GAO concluded that the OIG has not adhered to a number of professional standards and key practices for effective management. For example, GAO found that the OIG has been operating without a strategic plan. Absent such a plan, DHS OIG staff may not understand oversight priorities and goals, which can negatively affect operations and performance. GAO also found that the OIG did not adhere to professional standards for conducting audits, inspections, and evaluations. The committee previously raised concerns about the quality of the OIG reports, notably those issued regarding the death of children in Customs and Border Protection custody. The report did not reflect thorough and accurate reviews of the relevant facts and failed to address critical questions about CBP's ability to care for children in custody. Moreover, GAO confirmed what the committee had observed regarding the OIG's average time to issue reports, stating that the OIG's review timelines for work were protracted and some work products remained unapproved for months. For instance, in the Office of Audits, for fiscal year 2017, only 8 of 102 projects took more than 18 months to complete. Later in fiscal year 2020, over half of the projects took more than 18 months to complete. More troubling, GAO noted the OIG had not taken steps to understand the delays or determine how to address them. Congress and the public depend on the OIG to help detect and prevent fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement of DHS programs, operations, and spending. A report that takes years to release allows problems to persist unchecked. Overall, GAO noted that while the OIG has taken steps to address some of the problems identified in the report, its efforts are incomplete or have only recently been initiated. GAO's draft report makes clear the OIG must transform its management and operations. Just yesterday, the Washington Post and Project on Government Oversight published reports that call into question Inspector General Kafari's handling of politically sensitive topics. In particular, the report alleged the Inspector General blocked investigation proposed by Korea OIG staff into the previous administration's tear gassing of protesters in Lafayette Square and the spread of coronavirus among Secret Service personnel. Inspector generals must not shy away from the politically sensitive topics or allow political considerations to affect their work. The committee will be following up on these very troubling allegations. The committee expects the OIG to fulfill its mission with independence, integrity, transparency, and accountability. I look forward to hearing from Director Curry on GAO's finding and Inspector General Kafari about his plans to implement GAO's recommendations and reestablish confidence in the Office of Inspector General. Be assured that the committee will be watching the OIG's response to GAO's report closely in the days ahead. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you, and thank you for holding this very important hearing today. I also want to thank the witnesses, Dr. Kafari, the DHS Inspector General, and Chris Curry, a director in the Homeland Security and Justice team for the Government Accountability Office. Thank you both for being here, gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, as you and I know, the most important mission of this committee is to help protect the homeland. It's that simple. That job has never been more critical or complex as it is today. With highly sophisticated adversaries only getting smarter, bolder, and stronger, we must not only account for the threats of today, but also the emerging risks of tomorrow. You and I have spent much of our lives working to protect our nation and hold responsible those who seek to threaten it or cause it harm. One important aspect of that is ensuring a strong Department of Homeland Security by giving the men and women of the department all the tools and resources they need to do their job with integrity and respect. An important element of Homeland Security and of other federal agencies is the Office of Inspector General, or OIG for short. Originally created through the Inspector General Act of 1978, the Act created Inspector General positions and offices in more than a dozen specific departments and agencies. The DHS OIG was stood up with the department after the tragic events of 9/11. The Act gave these inspectors general the authority to review the internal documents of their departments or offices, investigate fraud, give policy advice, handle certain complaints by employees, and to report to the heads of their agencies and to the Congress on their activities. Although we wish there was not waste, fraud, or abuse within Homeland Security or any federal agency, the reality is we all know it exists. It is a mission of the IG's office to help the rest of the department identify and address waste, fraud, and abuse as much as possible. As a former federal prosecutor, I am fully supportive of the role that the Inspector General plays throughout the federal government. They are vital to ensuring accountability and transparency into each department or agency's activities. This is especially important in a department like the Department of Homeland Security, with a mission so paramount and so important. DHS is tasked with safeguarding the American people, our homeland, and our values against enemies, foreign and domestic. To do this on a daily basis, we must ensure that the men and women of the department are able to carry out their mission, and the IG's office helps ensure that this is done with integrity and honor. It is both our witnesses and the chairman, as both our witnesses and the chairman know well, in 2019, this committee, along with others, requested that the GAO conduct key oversight of the Department of Homeland Security's OIG's management and operations. GAO has now completed this exhaustive review, which spanned from 2015 to 2020, and has led to this hearing today. GAO evaluated the OIG's management and operations against audit quality standards, relevant federal standards for internal control, and leading practices for human capital management and organizational challenge. I have to say, after reading many GAO reports over the years, this one is very disturbing. I don't think that I've ever seen a GAO report that pinpoints so many weaknesses within an agency or department. GAO made 21 specific recommendations in total. They found weaknesses in multiple areas within the OIG that included organizational performance, quality assurance, reporting timeliness, and coordination with the DHS components of the OIG audits. These are all things that Chairman Thompson highlighted in his opening statement. The line that stuck out to me the most was, and I quote, "Without addressing these and other longstanding management weaknesses, the DHS OIG is not well positioned to fulfill its oversight mission," end quote. This is very concerning and certainly warrants further scrutiny. Dr. Kafari, I know that you inherited some of these problems and have made some changes, but this is a very serious problem and one that we must address immediately for the reasons I've stated. Without a fully functioning OIG, the department will never live up to its full potential, nor will it have the full trust of the American people, something it needs to succeed and something it absolutely cannot afford to lose. Reports like this also impact employee morale. The men and women of DHS need to have confidence in their leadership, including the IG. I'm willing and want to hear you out on these findings and look forward to your testimony. I want to hear what you have done, what you are doing, and your vision for the future. This matter is very important to the committee. There's no question about it. And I want you to take this report and its recommendations very seriously. And know that while I commit to working with you, I plan to make this one of our oversight priorities in Congress. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you again for holding this hearing. And thank you also to Mr. Curry and his team at GAO for conducting this important investigation. Without self-examination once in a while in government, we are never able to make the government work better. And we have to understand how important this hearing is and how important that we have faith in the IG going forward. So, Dr. Kafari, it's up to you to convince us that you have that vision going forward, that it's going to allow us to keep the faith in the Homeland Security in particular, but also in the OIG office. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. Members are also reminded that the committee will operate according to the guidelines laid out by myself and the ranking member. I welcome our panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Christopher Curry, Director of the United States Government Accountability Office, Homeland Security and Justice Team. Mr. Curry has worked at GAO for nearly 20 years. His portfolio consists of emergency management, DHS management, and emergency and disaster preparedness, response, and recovery issues. Our second witness is the Honorable Joseph B. Kafari. He was confirmed as the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General on July 25th, 2019. Dr. Kafari has previously served as a policy advisor for military and veteran affairs for the governor of Arizona. He also served more than 40 years in the United States Air Force. Without objection, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Curry.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Katko, for the opportunity to discuss our upcoming report on the DHS Office of Inspector General. Inspector Generals have a very difficult job. They provide independent oversight of sensitive and controversial issues. They have to be firm, they have to be fair, and they also have to be balanced. The DHS OIG oversees the third largest federal department and some of the most fragmented, sensitive, and publicly scrutinized issues in all of government. As the country's national auditor, we at GAO work to ensure that IGs and audit agencies are as effective as possible. We are all in the business of keeping government accountable and ensuring that taxpayer dollars are spent effectively. Our review has identified, as you mentioned, a wide range of challenges at the Office of Inspector General. To be clear, these challenges are longstanding and span multiple leaders and multiple administrations. As a result, blame rests with no one person, but on years of inconsistent and poor management discipline and practices in our view. Today, I'm going to provide some examples of these challenges, not to focus on the past, but just to be clear about what the root causes are, and more important, to identify what we think is needed to address them and transform this organization into what you and we all think it should be. Audit work is governed by very strict standards to ensure independence, quality, and timeliness. These standards are developed and accepted by the audit community because they work and because they help to avoid problems. Unfortunately, we found that the IG office lacks many of these policies and procedures, which has led to concerns with the quality of their work and other challenges such as demoralized staff and turnover. Specifically, we found that the office lacked a clear quality assurance program and process, which led to flaws in some of its work. For example, in 2018, a peer review led by the Council of Inspector Generals on Integrity and Efficiency gave the DHS-IG a rating of pass with deficiencies. Just to be clear, in the auditing world, this is not the passing grade that you want. This means that the peer reviewers had concerns about the quality of the work and that some work did not meet auditing standards. We've also found problems related to timeliness, as you've mentioned in your opening statement. For example, projects taking 2 years or more to complete have increased since 2017. This leads to several specific problems. First, reports sometimes lack the most current information from the agency and policies once they are finally issued. This in turn makes the findings and recommendations less useful to DHS and you, the Congress. The challenges also affect the OIG's relationship and credibility with the department it audits. To be straight, if an OIG is doing an effective job, there will always be some disagreement and friction. However, there is a level of credibility and trust between the auditor and the auditee by conducting work with integrity and accordance with standards. This relationship is critical to ensuring that the department actually implements recommendations made to improve effectiveness and efficiency. The lack of policies and consistency also led to DHS and its components raising questions about report quality. For example, we found that DHS expressed concern about inaccurate information or facts in about 23% of reports the OIG issued in fiscal year 2020. These are just a few of the areas we identified where there were challenges. There are many more that we will talk about in the full report, and we are planning numerous recommendations to address them. We're currently waiting for the IG's formal response to our recommendations, and we'll issue that report very soon. However, I want to close with one very important and clear point. Our recommendations are not just intended to be improvements around the margin. Collectively, the OIG must treat these as a multi-year transformation effort in our view. The good news is the IG has hundreds of dedicated public service who take pride in their oversight mission. We talked to many of these folks during our work. Involving and communicating with every single person in the organization will be key. This is not just my opinion. This is what we at GAO know after decades of looking at successful transformations across the government. This completes my statement, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Inspector General Kafari to summarize his statement for 5 minutes, but he's having some technical difficulties, and he will be giving that testimony at this point on telephone until the problems are resolved. Dr. Kafari.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson. Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Katko, and members of the committee. Before I begin, I offer you my condolences on the loss of your colleague, Representative Hastings. I understand many of you were attending his memorial earlier today. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about the Department of Homeland Security, Office of Inspector General, our important mission, and my ongoing efforts to make it a model workplace. Throughout my more than 40 years in public service, I have worked hard to find process improvements, efficiencies, and better ways to doing business at every station. This includes considering feedback from important oversight agencies such as the GAO. I am also very grateful for this committee's support. I have had the pleasure to meet personally with the chairman, ranking member, and more than half of this committee members to keep you apprised of our important work. With your support and confidence in our office, we have made significant strides. Since this time last year, we have had many accomplishments to be proud of. Most notably, we've maintained our efficiency and momentum despite the pandemic. Our FY20 Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey scores hit a 5-year high. We increased productivity and enhanced quality. We adopted a data-driven, risk-based decision-making model. We have more than 90 ongoing audits, inspections, and evaluations, including remote unannounced inspections of immigration detention facilities. And we recently passed 3 SIGI peer reviews within the last 12 months. We have left behind a tumultuous 5-year period in the IG's brief history, and our ship is heading in the right direction. For the past 21 months, I have worked diligently to build my senior leadership team and to identify, understand, and address the issues that have plagued our office. Since my confirmation, I have met with more than 70 members of Congress, and over the past several months, I have also had very productive meetings with then President-elect Biden's DHS transition team and several one-on-one discussions with Secretary Mayorkas. I have also adopted initiatives to improve employee morale, including increased communication through weekly update messages, more than 60 small group meetings with my IG staff. I've had several town hall meetings, and I've increased flexibility by implementing a 100% telework policy and expanded schedule so all my employees can address challenges brought on by the pandemic. We appreciate the work that Mr. Curry and his team at GAO have done. We view GAO's recommendation as a tool to aid our office's continuing progress, and we appreciate GAO's input and professionalism. Even prior to receiving GAO's draft report, my office was already in the process of implementing improvements. For example, we have contracted with the congressionally chartered National Academy of Public Administration to create a 5-year strategic plan, which will anchor our planning efforts. We've also extended an option on our NAPA contract to help us implement many of GAO's recommendations. I've made several recent organizational adjustments, creating 2 new offices, the Office of Integrity and the Office of Innovation. This change better aligns DHS IG's organizational structure with our larger peer agencies, such as the DOD IG and Health and Human Services IG. We follow GAO model practices to implement these changes, which will improve our quality assurance. I present the committee with these final thoughts. The issues within DHS IG that GAO identified in its draft report did not manifest overnight. Therefore, it would be presumptuous to suggest that these issues could be fixed overnight. But I am so wholly committed to the staff of the DHS IG, this committee, Congress, and the American people that I will spare no effort to build a stronger and better organization. Our improvements over the last 21 months show we are headed in the right direction, and I have every confidence in our future success. This concludes my testimony, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to answering your questions.
I thank both witnesses for their testimony. I'll remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the panel. I'll now recognize myself for questions. Mr. Curry, I understand that the soon-to-be-released report you referenced in your testimony challenges and looks at the Department Office of Inspector General for several years, and that you'll make 21 recommendations. Is this normal in terms of recommendations, or is that an unusually high number of recommendations?
Thank you, sir. This is a very large number of recommendations, particularly when we look at one specific office or sub-office within a department. It's not out of the question that we would make this many recommendations in one report, especially if the scope is very large. But this is definitely a very large number of recommendations when looking at the management of one entity in the government.
So, and I assume you have presented these recommendations to the IG's office.
Yes, sir.
When do you expect a response back?
The final response is due back by May the 12th.
Okay. Thank you very much. Dr. Kafari, as I assume you both are aware, on August 4th, 2020, GAO found that Acting Secretary Wolf and Acting Deputy Secretary Cuccinelli were serving in those roles pursuant to an invalid order of succession. GAO referred that to the DHS's IG for questions. And in September 2020 letter to this committee, the OIG declined GAO's referral and disputed its conclusion. Now, I understand that at an August 19th, 2020 meeting, you informed senior staff that you would meet with Acting Secretary Wolf to discuss the GAO report before making a decision on how to proceed. Did Secretary Wolf tell you not to accept the GAO referral?
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, I don't believe I actually had a meeting with the secretary referenced that matter. It was probably regarding other ongoing investigations that we had. I did make a decision to review the GAO report, and my determination after considering input from my career professional staff was that that matter of question would best be addressed as an intra-branch dispute by the judiciary branch. And as a matter of fact, I believe 6 U.S. district courts have been looking at that issue and have ruled, and 4 additional ones are embarking on the same issue.
So you're saying that to say what?
I'm just filling in the blanks, sir. I don't believe I had a meeting with the secretary involving this. My office of counsel may have spoken with their counsel's office, but I don't believe I had a meeting with the secretary about that. And I issued my conclusions.
So you do understand the appearance of a conflict in something this sensitive goes to the credibility of the Inspector General's office if there's any communication around this issue that for which you are asked by GAO to look into.
Yes, sir. Well, I just go back to my record. You know, it speaks for itself. We've improved our Fed scores. We've increased productivity during the pandemic, and I've increased the quality of my reports. I just got done passing 3 peer reviews. I believe in July of last year, this question may have come up about outside influence of our office. Again, I'll commit to you and the other members of this committee and the Congress at large that I get no outside influence regarding my decisions to undertake or not undertake a particular matter.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the ranking member for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Curry, in preparing for today's testimony, I was, I don't know if shocked is the right word, but very surprised by the amount of recommendations and findings in here. 21 is an unbelievable number for something like this, but I commend you for your thoroughness, because if we don't know there's a problem, we don't know how to fix it. And that's what your role is. And that's what the role of OIG is, in my opinion. And, you know, we have to ensure that you're both performing at the top of your game. So Mr. Curry, briefly, this report spanned from 2015 up to 2020, am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so much of this report predated the time that Mr. Kafari is in office. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so and there's obviously some current these concerns remain after Mr. Kafari took over. So what do you think would be what are the first steps that the OIG should take to instill a culture of integrity and professionalism at OIG? And what do you think they should be? Have you seen any signs that they're starting to go in that direction?
Well, I think all of our recommendations are, I categorize them as the building blocks or the steps. Some of them need to be sequenced. Some of them, one comes after another. One of the things we talk about at the end of the report is that I think that all of these things should be looked at as a organizational transformation effort. And there are very specific protocols and best practices looking at decades of past federal transformations and reorganizations to guide this type of thing because they work. So I think all of these things need to be put together into one transformational plan. It needs to have a dedicated management leadership team that's responsible for it. There needs to be, for example, a communication plan to all employees about what the vision is, what the timelines are, what the metrics are, and how do we know when we've reached success. There needs to be constant communication with Congress and others. There's a very specific process for doing this. It's not impossible. It's been done before.
Mr. Curry, I thank you very much for your professionalism and your thoroughness. It's a critically important thing you're doing, so I guess I just want to say keep it up. Dr. Kafari, you've got this is not a great report for you to have, and obviously a lot of this predated your time there, but you're the head of this now. And I want to get a feel from you and some assurances what you're doing to help turn this ship around, because you've got a monumental task in front of you. I want to hear what your vision is and what you're planning to do to turn this around.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So first off, you have my commitment that I'm going to continue to work with my counterparts at GAO to continue to improve our office here. And we appreciate, obviously, the committee's continued support for our efforts. As I mentioned in my opening statement, back in August of 2020, last summer, we contracted with NAPA to assist us in developing a 5-year strategic plan. As you know, all subsequent organizational functions flow from the top, and the organizational plan is basically our bedrock. We didn't have one in the few years that I've been here, and so subsequently I decided that I was going to follow Congress's their recommendation in the sense that they urge departments to strongly embrace NAPA, and as NAPA provides expert, nonpartisan advice in solving agencies' management challenges. So we've done that. NAPA is poised to give us a report toward the end of this summer. We're going to go and exercise a 1-year extension option with them so that they will help us implement the GAO recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I just wanted to offer a suggestion, a respectful suggestion that this, to me, should be the first of a series of hearings with OIG and maybe with, because we have to get the report back. And once we get the report, I want to see what progress is being made going down the road, looking at the 21 deficiencies identified. And so perhaps at some point, 6 months from now or whatever, we need to revisit this issue and see what progress is being made. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I assure the ranking member, as soon as the response is sufficiently provided back to GAO, we will take it back up.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Not too long. The chair now recognizes other members for questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. As previously outlined, I recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority. Members are reminded to unmute themselves when recognized for questioning and to the extent practical, to leave their cameras on so they are visible to the chair. Chair recognizes the young lady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much for this very important hearing, and thank you to the ranking member. Having been on the Homeland Security Committee for now 2 decades, I know that in the midst of the leadership of any Secretary of Homeland Security, the IG is crucial. So, Mr. Curry, let me raise questions with you before I ask the new Inspector General, at least a person different than what we have dealt with. In my framework, or in the frame of my question, I indicated the magnitude of responsibilities of the Homeland Security Department. And this committee, by the way, our chairman, and along with those of us as members, first noted domestic terrorism as one of America's greatest threats. The responsibility of Homeland Security is domestic security, national security. So in the context of what you found, operating without a strategic plan, maybe not an effective system of internal quality assurance, has no way of knowing of its internal processes, the time to complete projects is significantly increased. In that backdrop, how dangerous is it in terms of the nation's security when you don't have these processes in place and really a strategic plan? Because this department is the, in quotes, go-to department on domestic security. And when we are not secure, it is the one that should have provided the profile and notice to this nation. Mr. Curry?
Thank you, ma'am. I think there's 2 things. The first concern I would have with that is that you don't know whether you're addressing the highest risks. There is nothing that this department does that isn't sensitive and sometimes controversial and in the public eye. And without a strategic plan or a clearly communicated set of priorities, nobody knows what the focus is, or maybe more important, why. I think the second concern is without those things, it leaves the option in there for other people to fill in gaps as to why certain issues are being addressed, or the IG is taking on certain work and not others. The way you combat that is very clear planning and clear communication about what your priorities are.
And does it endanger or does it lessen our quick response and our ability to secure the nation?
It can, ma'am. I mean, if you're not doing the work at the highest quality, the risk is that you're not identifying the problem areas as quick as you could to address them as quick as possible.
Thank you. You might comment on that as well to the new Inspector General. I have a quick question for you and Mr. Kafari. Thank you. In the spring, on the fall of 2020, a group of us wrote 172 members wrote a letter to the IG on the case of a whistleblower, Ms. Wooten, at the Irving County Detention Center. We also had as a case Ms. Pauline Najeji Bynum, who I had to work to get off a plane, and she was being deported, and she was one of the women that said that her organs were taken out at this particular facility. I'd be interested in whether your office is even aware of this, and we have been waiting for a report on this, and if you would respond to that, as well as my comment about the findings of the GAO that you have no strategic plan, and is it your assessment that we are less secure with no strategic plan and no ability to interact with respect to internal quality insurance? Inspector General?
Yes, ma'am, and it's very nice to visit with you again. I appreciate Mr. Curry's comments. I agree with them. That's the reason that early on, even before GAO actually ramped up and took a look at our organization, that I hired, contracted with NAPA to help us develop the strategic plan. I believe that, again, that's the foundation for us going forward. It gives us a solid rock, and all the work flows from that. Regarding the Irwin Detention Facility, ma'am, we opened a special review in the summer of last year. I believe we've responded to all the members that review was opened by our office. We are working that currently. We've interviewed Ms. Wooten on a number of occasions with her attorney, and we've interviewed several of the female detainees. We've collected documents from from ICE, and we've also interviewed several staff at the hospital where the attending physician works. We're getting to the point where we're concluding that work, and we are using our contracted medical services team that you graciously were able to fund for us last year. And we are looking at the health care that was provided to those detainees.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman,
Ladies,
may I offer as a documents into the record at this time, Mr. Chairman, or?
yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I know my time has expired. Thank you so very much. Let me offer into the record a former DHS watchdog who got too cozy with managers is put on leave. That was dated April 25, 2014, certainly before you, Mr. Inspector General. And the biographical sketch of Ms. Pauline Nadiji Bynum, a woman who was at the Irvin and thought that she had organs removed without her permission, and was then almost deported. She obviously did not get deported, but almost deported when she wanted to tell her story. I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes gentleman from New Jersey, Chair recognizes gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Katko, for holding today's hearing. And although I believe it's important for the committee to have a discussion about the operations of the Inspector General within DHS, we would be remiss not to note that there's a very urgent matter to be discussed, a humanitarian crisis at our southern border. I look forward in the future where we can discuss and work together to resolve this threat to our sovereignty and the human beings down there that are suffering incredibly. What we face is unprecedented and should be addressed aggressively and in a bipartisan manner. But thank you for holding this hearing. It's important as well. Dr. Kufari, I have not received your video feed, but I presume that you are still here. You mentioned in your written testimony, sir, that since your confirmation as Inspector General, employee morale has improved to what you referred to as a 5-year high. We've held hearings in the past that address this issue, and I'm pleased to see improvement if that's the case. There's no question that the crisis at the southern border is clearly overwhelming DHS personnel. So much so that Secretary Mayorkas has asked for volunteers to aid in the overwhelming number of migrants at the border. Can you describe what steps your office is taking to ensure the well-being of DHS frontline workers at the border, please, sir?
Well, Mr. Higgins, nice visiting with you again. My video is not working. There's some buffering problems, but I'm on just
Understood.
Audio.
Okay.
Okay. So regarding the border, I took a proactive approach 2 weeks ago. A few of my senior staff and I visited the southwest border in Texas. We spoke with subject matter experts from the Border Patrol and from ICE's detention facilities, as well as sheriffs, local individuals, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. We went to McAllen, Texas, Laredo, Del Rio, and Eagle Pass, and took a view. I have to tell you that as a father and as a grandfather, I was terribly troubled that the cartels are making money hand over fist, and individuals down there are just abandoning children in the desert. We are opening a review to ensure that DHS is properly handling and vaccinating their frontline employees, and that we may be opening a review as well to consider their staffing models, both at the Border Patrol ports and the ports of entry.
You've mentioned some important steps there, and I presume you'll keep the committee advised as progress is made regarding your interaction with DHS frontline workers. I have one last question in the interest of time, and just to advise my committee members, colleagues, I cannot see the clock on my screen, so if I'm running out of time, I apologize. But you listed in your testimony, sir, that you mentioned the ICE detention facilities and unannounced inspections. I'd like you to share with the committee and America some insight into that. Can you describe any trends that you've seen and how these, give us an overview of the unannounced inspections, because I like that program.
Yes, sir. So you do have my commitment to continue to keep the committees informed of our progress. But regarding the unannounced inspections, we continue to do those even in the COVID sort of restricted environment. Our most recent work was published a few months ago in March. It involves the La Palma detention facility in Arizona. We opened that due to a rising COVID spike of detainees, and we issued the report. We did that remotely to protect not only our employees, but also the detainees and the workers in the facility. But we issued several findings, and we have 8 recommendations that the department is considering for implementation.
Gentleman's
Thank you,
time
and-
has expired. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Chair
Mr. Chairman.
recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey for 5 minutes, Mr. Payne.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, good to see you and for this timely hearing. Mr. Curry, throughout the last year and a half, this committee's heard from numerous and current and former employees about how the IG and his inner circle fostered an environment of punishment for dissent and fear of retaliation. In the unsolicited email you see on the screen, the director of OIG's Whistleblower Protection Unit said that although I likely have information that is relevant to the issues that we are looking at, I'm concerned that my agency may not respect 5 USC 77211, the prohibition against interfering with or denying the rights of an employee to furnish information to a congressional committee. What did GAO find with respect to the morale of the employees at the OIG, and how has it affected the willingness of staff to share their concerns?
Yes, sir. So we actually don't have the most recent morale scores from OPM. I think those are due to come out any day now or any week now. So I'm not sure what's happened in terms of those numbers over the last year. But one of the things that we've found pretty consistently across all the offices we looked at is a lack of clear policies and procedures surrounding a lot of different things. And one of those things is human capital plans and measures. So, for example, we found that the IG did not have an anti-harassment policy. They had no performance management policy for its employees at the time, and there was question and confusion among people about whether they did or didn't. There was question about whether certain policies were outdated, were in effect, or were not in effect. And I think what this did is this made people call into question certain decisions they were observing from top level staff that seemed somewhat arbitrary. And I think the problem is when you have no clear policies or procedures and it's not transparent, it's very difficult to be consistent in your application of those policies and procedures. And so people fill in the gaps. And it creates an environment sometimes where there's fear because there's no consistency or transparency.
What kind of impact does this type of environment have on OIG's ability to achieve its mission and implement your recommendations?
Well, I think first of all, it makes it difficult to plan ahead. I mean, for example, one of the things we found was a lack of a clear quality and review process for reports. We heard from people who would complete their audit work and reports and send reports up the chain for review. In one case, we heard they waited 6 months to hear back. They had no sense on when things were going to be returned. So, I mean, this just makes it very, very difficult to plan your work, and frankly, just negatively impacts morale.
What kind of leadership do you think it will take to solve the issues the DHS OIG faces?
Yes, sir. I mentioned in my opening statement, we at GAO have looked at organizational transformations across government so often over the decades that we have developed a set of best practices. And this is not just academic theory. These are things that we've seen successful organizations do. And I think, first of all, one of the things it takes a very open and humble approach to working with the whole organization and the employees to address these issues. If you do not have your employees on board with you and they're not part of this and constantly communicated with, and it's just a top-down exercise, it will not be successful. Because the employees have to buy in.
Yeah. Well, frankly, it's stunning that the OIG's own whistleblower protection unit did not believe the office would uphold the law and thus refused to speak to Congress until he had already left. I worry other employees are not coming forward for fear of retaliation. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes gentleman from North Carolina for 5 minutes, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Curry, last month, Senator Capito and 39 other senators, submitted a request to GAO that I subsequently joined, as did 59 other House members, to investigate the Biden administration's decision to halt congressionally appropriated funding for the border wall. It appears clear that the Biden administration violated the Impoundment Control Act in taking this action. It's my understanding that news outlets have reported GAO will be opening an investigation into this action by the Biden administration. As someone who is a subject matter expert on reviewing DHS policies at GAO, can you confirm that GAO is indeed opening an investigation on whether President Biden violated the Impoundment Control Act?
Thank you, sir. Border security and immigration is not my subject area, but I'm pretty sure what you said is accurate. I will get back to you as soon as possible with a definitive answer to that.
If that in fact is correct, as you believe, how quickly can we expect GAO to reach conclusions?
Well, thank you, sir. I can't answer that today. Our Office of General Counsel will be conducting that review, but I will put you in touch with those folks ASAP and get you an answer.
Thanks, sir. If President Biden wishes to follow the law and comply with the Impoundment Control Act, would you recommend that he restart border wall construction immediately?
I don't have a position on that, sir. That is not my area of expertise.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Dr. Kafari, following up on your comments in response to Representative Higgins about your visit to the southwest border, did the conditions that you observed there constitute a crisis?
To meet with you again, I've heard that term be used to describe the ongoing problems at the border. It's not a term of art that I use. It's very deeply troubling. What I can just share is what the subject matter experts who are dealing with this every day on the ground shared with me, and that is they are overwhelmed. It's causing problems for morale within CBP and for the Office of Port Enforcement. And as a result, we have opened up, it informed our work We have opened up 3 new projects that we've told the department about. One is to look at ICE's contract with the housing of migrants and hotels. We're looking at border security screening operations, and we're looking at DHS and Health and Human Services interoperability to pass information about the status and whereabouts of particular migrants.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kafari. Will your office investigate whether policy changes adopted by the Biden administration caused these very troubling circumstances, to use your words?
No, sir. We don't investigate policy decisions. We investigate if policy is implemented in the law, how those are, whether they're being effective or not.
You made reference to how Mexican drug cartels are taking advantage of the very unfortunate circumstances on the southern border. Would you agree that the Department of Homeland Security has a responsibility to avoid adopting policies that facilitate the criminal enterprises of Mexican cartels?
Sir, I can't comment on policies or whether they should be implemented or not.
So that's just outside your purview, is that it?
Yes, sir. As an independent inspector general, it is.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes, Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this very important hearing. And thank you, Inspector General Kafari and Mr. Curry, for joining us today. According to the GAO, from fiscal years 2015 to 2020, the Office of Inspector General implemented a number of organizational changes. However, those changes did not fully follow key practices and thus had negative effects or consequences. For example, some senior leaders described the amount of frequency of organizational change as negatively affecting morale. Inspector General Kafari, your office informed the committee last week that you announced an organizational realignment based on strategic priorities and ongoing reviews that you initiated. This realignment includes creating an Office of Innovation and an Office of Integrity, among other things. Inspector General Kafari, can you please discuss when you started your review and who was involved and when staff were informed of the review and realignment decisions, sir?
Yes, sir. Good visiting with you again. So my recent realignment and the creation of those 2 offices are actually the 3rd phase of a multi-phase approach. My first was to right-size my HR group. I needed to return that human resources function back to the Office of Management where it belonged and get it out of the council's office. I also set up a professional whistleblower unit in my Office of Counsel. And the 3rd phase, which is the one you just mentioned, was to create these 2 offices of integrity and the Office of Innovation. It was a phased approach. It took about 6 months getting into it, starting basically back in the summer of last year. And now that with the creation of those 2 offices, my organization will now conform to classic structures that are benchmarked at larger organizations in the IJ community, such as the Department of Defense and the Department and the Health and Human Services Office. I would like to point out that the Office of Integrity, to the GAO's credit, this office will have an internal quality review and check function for investigations and audits. And my Office of Innovation is going to be aligning my strategic planning and my data scientist group.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Curry, given your current work reviewing the OAG for the past year, what's your reaction to this latest reorganization? And does it address the challenges the GAO has identified at the OIG?
Well, I can definitively say that I don't think it addresses them yet because there hasn't been enough time. We just found out about this about a week ago. Um, I think it is absolutely in the IG's prerogative and the organization's prerogative to make organizational changes. That is often a first step that is done in any transformation or reorganization, but I can tell you it's never the full solution. And oftentimes it's just the start of the work. Once there is a new office, it has to be implemented effectively. The employees have to clearly understand the vision, and it has to establish the policies that are necessary so the whole organization understands what it's going to do and what role it plays. In fact, one of the problems we've identified over the past 6 years at the IG is then there has been so many organizational changes made, sometimes without the people in those offices even knowing about them or why, that's created delays and confusion and has stymied improvement efforts through the years too. So I think what Dr. Kafari has said and some of the reasoning behind the reorganization seems to make a lot of sense to be in alignment with other similar organizations, but we'll just have to see, and we'll monitor that as we look at how they're implementing the recommendations.
And Mr. Ranking Member and Mr. Chair, I do hope we have continuing hearings on this issue. It sounds like a very much the early stages of a work in progress. Thank you very much, and with that, I yield.
I assure the gentleman from California we will do just that. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Katko. I appreciate your holding this hearing and also the testimony of our witnesses. And Dr. Kafari, I want to also personally thank you for taking seriously your oversight function of the border crisis. During our visit to the border with Homeland Security and Ranking Member Katko, we learned that Secretary Mayorkas made a trip to the border but remained at the airport. So it's hard to conduct oversight of policy when you remain in an airport and receive briefings or hearings. And we learned at that time, and Ranking Member Katko and I sent a letter forward to HHS on learning that the current procedures wherein a sponsor for an unaccompanied minor was to be verified and checked and called, that this procedure was being shortcutted, if you will, not performed, and also background checks for those who were supposed to have oversight and protection of unaccompanied minors in the HHS facilities was also being deleted. So we're hoping that I understand from you that you can't speak on policy, but that there be some investigation into the lack of procedure and the lack of security for those unaccompanied minors coming across the border. So I thank you for that. Mr. Curry, you, in your professional opinion, and I know you have mentioned this, but what additional steps should the DAS-IG take to prevent this culture from continuing? Granted that this, as you said, has been going on since 2015 up until 2018 and predates Dr. Kafari.
Thank you. There are many steps, so let me just pick a few important ones that I think. One thing is that there has to be a process for updating or developing policies around important management principles. And so things like what is your anti-harassment policy? What is your employee performance management policy? What is your grievance policy? What is your quality assurance process? Even down into the level of who needs to review the reports and when, and what are the time frames? What's the synchronization of that? These are all things that any audit organization, including ourselves at GAO, we have very strict, clear policies and procedures, not just so our own staff understand how to do the work and what to expect, but so everyone outside externally understands it. You in Congress, and also as well the agency that gets audited. This creates a predictable process. It creates a trusted process with integrity, and helps to avoid a lot of the miscommunications and problems that can come up. I mentioned in my statement, there's always going to be friction between an auditor and auditee, but there are things that you can put in place to make sure there's integrity in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Curry, and I say this with all compliment. My husband, who is a compliance officer who started compliance programs, I am hearing you echoing in my ears as you have stated your policies and procedures, and he constantly reminds me of policies and procedures and their importance. Given the breadth and depth of the misconduct, and again, I want to emphasize, as you have done, that this has gone on from 2015 to 2020, and then you worry about the institutional knowledge of those individuals who are from former past administrations coming into another administration and how that affects the culture within that department or facility. But given the depth of the misconduct, the allegations, the lack of leadership surrounding the DHS OIG, and again, Dr. Kafari, knowing that you have only come in recently and you're now having to handle this situation. So over these numerous years, what can Congress do? What should we do to help ameliorate the situation?
Thank you. I think the biggest, this hearing is a great first step, because without this hearing, the public would not know about these issues and we couldn't get into the depth in discussing them. But I think, as we've mentioned, in addition to just monitoring the recommendations we've made and are they being implemented, and of course we communicate those things to you as part of our routine work. I think this needs to be looked at as a transformational effort. And so I think extra oversight of this will be key. Additional hearings, I think, would be a good way to do that. And you coming to an agreement with the Office of Inspector General of what you expect from them and when would be good too, because deadlines are also very important.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I think both Ranking Member Katko and Chairman Thompson have both assured us that we'll have continued hearings, and then having some scorecard by which we can measure progress, I think would be important also. Thank you so much, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, gentlelady. Yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York for 5 minutes. Ms. Clark.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our ranking member for this very important hearing this afternoon. Inspector General Kafari, we've heard about the Wilmer Hale report, and you have publicly pushed both to Congress and media outlets the results of an internal investigation that you contracted to be conducted by Wilmer Hale. According to a project on the government oversight article released, POGO, yesterday, you spent a lot of taxpayer money to conduct this investigation, about $1.4 million, money that could have been spent on more important matters than 3 individuals, 2 of whom no longer work at the OIG, who are ultimately found to have not been engaged in any unwillful conduct. I don't want to waste time on personnel squabbles, but I do want to know a little bit more about your decision to open and scope this investigation. I'm sure you were aware that there were claims made to Congress and the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency at CG about other employees than the ones you've had investigated. Why were these or those allegations not referred to Wilmer Hale to investigate?
Thank you, ma'am. So I was confirmed as the Inspector General of this department in July of 2019. When I arrived here, after discussions with Senate staff and members of the HISGAC committee, I realized and was informed I inherited a very, very dysfunctional leadership, senior leadership team with who were presenting to me series of misconduct at the highest levels. It's well documented. There was instability in this organization. There was a conflict between leadership that predates my arrival, including criminal misconduct by a former acting inspector general. I followed the Council on IG recommendations and fulfillment of my responsibilities to protect the integrity of this organization, and ultimately decided under a competitive process to hire an outside entity. It turned out to be Wilmer Hale Law Firm, whose senior partner conducted the investigation and provided us with a copy of the report at the end of December of last year. The cost of that report was less than 1% of my entire budget. I think that's a very good use of resources to protect the $190 million. And I informed the oversight committees, I informed the appropriators, and I informed our manager over at the Office of Management and Budget, our examiner.
Well, look, on that point, General Kufari, as the Wilmer Hale report makes clear, there were also several allegations against you. If you were committed to an independent review of all related claims, you would have had those independent investigators look into those claims as well, but you did not. Is that correct?
SIGI actually looked into those allegations and dismissed them.
Okay. POCO also noted in its article that Wilmer Hale report included investigating individuals who made constitutionally and legally protected communications to Congress and SIGI. This is the textbook definition of whistleblower retaliation. Do you know whether you or other OIG employees were under investigation by SIGI for whistleblower retaliation?
Not to my knowledge, no, ma'am.
Very well. Well, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for this opportunity to have our conversation with the IG. I'm just concerned that we don't have a conflict of interest and we're not getting to the root of the challenges being faced within the Department of Homeland Security, in particular the IG's office. So thank you for being so forthcoming with your responses, Mr. IG. It looks like we're sort of on some thin ice here, and I'd like to continue to look into, as you roll out your term here, a lot more transparency to the American people. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Harshbarger, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Curry, it's discouraging to know that there was such a lack of policies and procedures, that were not implemented. In the business world, we look at things from, for example, a Six Sigma basis, and, those are strategies that are set out to improve the quality of the output of a process, and it identifies and removes the causes of defect by minimizing the impact. And, those are just common sense things that these agencies should be doing. And that's the only way that I can see that you can measure the outcome. And because when there's no clear direction, as they say in the business world, if you don't run your business, your employees do, because there is no clear path. I guess I have a question. How long has the management and operational weaknesses you found in your report been in place at the department? I know the report went back to 2015.
Yes, ma'am. Well, definitely back to 2015, but we talk about in our report that those are just the things, the documents and the people we talk to, where we could really do a deep dive. There are examples we talk about in the report. For example, several reports that were retracted well before then, prior leaders who were indicted for misconduct, and a lot of other challenges that have come up in the past or in past peer reviews that indicated there were challenges. And as the chairman said in his opening statement, we did a review, albeit a lot more limited in scope, back in 2014, and identified a few areas where there were improvements were needed. But it's fair to say this goes back many years.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Dr. Kafari, I guess my question is, in your cover letter to the Wilmer Hale report, you wrote that the Council of the Inspector General on Integrity and Efficiency didn't act on your complaints regarding the 3 senior executive service employees. Did they ever provide you with a reason as to why they didn't act on your complaint, sir?
Then they referred the matter back to me to complete as I saw necessary.
Really? Okay. Well, it looks like there's got to be, there's some work to be done. Best practices is the best way to go forward and hold people accountable. And, I hate it for this agency because that's what, when you investigate misconduct, you expect an outcome. So thank you for your time, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and I also want to thank the Inspector General for appearing and also for making his office available for any questions that we have. I first wanted to just see if the Inspector General could give us an update on the Brian Murphy case. As a member of the House Intelligence Committee, we have been briefed on many allegations by Mr. Murphy regarding the politicization of intelligence at the department. I'm sorry, you hear a 2-year-old singing Let It Go from Frozen in the background. But this is a serious question, which is, what are you doing about Mr. Murphy's allegations about the politicization of intelligence under the Trump administration, particularly as it related to Russia, as well as the Portland investigations?
Sir, thanks for visiting with me a few days ago. Certainly, I can provide you and other members of the committee with a closed-door member briefing. This is public, so I can't discuss ongoing work, but I can tell you that I am available at your discretion to receive a briefing or to provide a briefing to you and members of the staff.
Great. And also, Inspector, would you agree that OIG should be as transparent as possible in order for the public and Congress to hold the department accountable?
Absolutely, sir.
And, at your confirmation hearing 2 years ago, Senator Rosen of Nevada asked how you would handle whistleblower retaliation complaints. And you told her you would evaluate all the facts and make a final decision and recommendations as it related to decisions. However, we have not seen, some of these reports made public or provided to Congress. And I was hoping you could just give us an update on if it's your intent that you will be releasing to the public or to the Congress these reports.
Well, sir, I did make that to Senator Rosen. It was a very good question. I answered it truthfully, obviously. I believe, obviously, in maximum protection for whistleblowers. There is a standing request from Chairman Thompson to my office, which I'm fulfilling, to provide ROIs of substantiated cases of whistleblower reprisals. We've provided those, and it's on a rolling basis. We've already given some, and we'll continue to do so.
And further, just in your evaluation of the department, as we look on the authorizing and appropriating side, what further resources do you need? I mean, just recognizing this agency now is approaching 20 years since the genesis of its creation, September 11 attack, and it's responsible for Homeland Security. It's responsible for border security, FEMA, cybersecurity. What additional resources do you need to make sure, particularly on the cyber side, to make sure that we are protecting our government against attacks from China and Russia? What resources do you need so that you can adequately evaluate that?
Well, sir, first off, I want to thank the House because it was a House-led, followed by a Senate increase in our budget last year. We're at $190 million. We see need for increases in our budget that would support increased oversight of COVID and also, as you mentioned, of cybersecurity. Any help this committee can give to us I'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member for this hearing. I had a question of the GAO. Does the GAO, when you doing when you were doing this analysis and this study on the IG, as you were formulating or you were getting to some findings, were you communicating that with the IG's office, or did you hold everything until a final report was could be issued?
Thank you for the question, sir. We have a very strict process. In fact, government auditing standards outline the process that should be used, so there's no surprises at the end. So what we do is this happened back in January. We send over what we call a statement of fact, which is most of the report in its entirety and all the factual information and data from the report. We send that over. We have an exit meeting with the auditee or the department we audit, in this case, the OIG. We sometimes have very significant back and forth, multiple meetings talking about what's in the report, clarifying any information, correcting any information that goes on. And that process, in this case, we actually granted extra time than we typically would because they wanted to provide us with a lot more documentation and information. So we accommodated that. And then we send the draft report to them. We just sent it April 12th. And at that time, they have a chance to provide their official comment and continue to provide any technical comments they see well before public issuance.
No, I understand that, but that appears to me that you were doing a final report. You did your final, basically a preliminary report. You have a whole bunch of findings, and then that is then okay. I've got all these findings now. You need to respond to this. My question was, as you're coming up with these findings, do you communicate that into those individual findings to the agency prior to putting out a draft report?
No, sir, because typically we're not finished, assessing all the evidence and applying it against the criteria. So we don't want to identify any deficiencies and potential recommendations to the agency until we are 100% sure in the work that we've done.
So you don't put all these small findings that you have, each individual finding only comes, you only put that together in your first draft report. You don't say, hey, we found this issue and it's pretty significant. You don't tell the IG that we found this issue, it's pretty significant, until you have some kind of a bigger draft report ready to go. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You think that's right?
Sir, part of the reason we do that is because government auditing standards are so strict and thorough that we don't want to release any information before it's been fully vetted. We often find things in the course of our work.
Excuse me. I didn't say that you would release the information. I'm talking about talking to the agency themselves. All right, that you have found something, and that hey, it's significant, and you need to look at this before a final report is issued, which could be a year or two down the road. That's what I'm saying. That's my point. Okay. I've got a couple other points. You talk about the IG not having rules, policies, procedures, etc. It would seem to me that most IGs throughout the federal agencies, their jobs would be pretty similar. Is that a pretty accurate statement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So why in the world do we have separate standard operating procedures and policies and rules for harassment, et cetera, that differ from one IG to another in different? Why do they have to create their own set of SOPs, et cetera?
Well, because they all operate within their own individual departments, but the Council of Inspector Generals sets the best practices for doing that. So it's pretty standard across the IGs.
And it's not mandated that all IGs at least have a set of basic principles, that these are the principles that the federal government says you must adhere to? That's not standardized throughout the federal government?
No, that is standardized. In fact, GAO, we issue generally accepted government auditing standards, which are the criteria and the standards by which auditors are to follow in doing their audits. And
No, I
IGs
understand that.
follow.
I understand auditing, okay, but you also said that they didn't have a set of SOPs for, harassment, discrimination, et cetera. That it
Gentleman's
appears to me
time
that,
from Florida has expired.
thank
Chair
you, sir.
recognizes the gentlelady from Nevada for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Curry, previously, you had Inspector General Kufari testifying or reporting to this committee that the OIG's delay in issuing reports was based on the fact that the reports were of such poor quality that they required substantive edits. That's not much of an admission. I must say that's pretty sorry to start with. But anyway, the committee reviewed all the drafts of a select group of these reports, and it didn't appear that that was an adequate explanation for why these were taking such a long time. Now, this is particularly troubling when you're reviewing anything, but especially to me when we're talking about some of the issues concerning family separation and conditions at ICE facilities. Just this past October, I joined a letter with several of my colleagues from this committee where we shared our concerns about the welfare of children being expelled at the southern border. Now, the Inspector General's office didn't investigate this or get back to us, or they were taking an awfully long time. I wonder, Mr. Curry, if you could really identify the cause for these delays. Was it because they needed so much editing? Was it because they weren't a priority? Was it because they didn't have the staff to do the reports? Could you address that?
Yes, ma'am. We actually, that's exactly what we tried to identify. And the results of what we found are that, for example, there is no quality assurance process or process for how the reviews are supposed to happen at the end of these audits. And so, for example, some of the staff told us that when they would send completed work up for review, they just wouldn't hear back from the front office, sometimes for up to 6 months. So I think there was a lot of confusion, and the staff themselves raised that to us that they didn't even understand exactly why some things were happening and moving forward and others were not.
Well, this is especially problems when it's a time-sensitive issue like children at the border. You would think that'd be given kind of a priority and they'd get on that right away. And it makes you wonder if they didn't just throw it in a drawer and hope we'd forget about it, or the longer they stalled, maybe the problem would go away. So I think that's something that we definitely need to address and get some straight answers about. So I appreciate you having looked into it and realized that it is a serious problem. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan for 5 minutes, Mr. Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and thank you to our guests who are here today. I appreciate both the availability and the commitment to trying to reform the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security. I'll be very honest, the draft report, I have some very serious concerns about the prolific use of acronyms within this. I guess first, just a quick question, Mr. Curry, as I'm going through. The CIGIE, what's the best way to briefly, is that CG? I mean, how do you guys refer to that?
I think the acronym is referred to as the SIGI.
SIGI, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I guess I'm always of the opinion that, an Office of an Inspector General wants to be lean and focused, and I'm aware as not only Dr. Kafari mentioned, but also as has been brought up by many of my colleagues, that the issues outlined in this report are stemming from multiple administrations over multiple years. And obviously, Dr. Kafari only took on the role, I believe, in July of 2019 when he was confirmed as the Inspector General. But Dr. Kafari, I want to just dive into something a little bit more on the Wilmer Hale report and just how that impacted the office more broadly. I know that, that audit that was initially requested by the Senate Homeland Committee in December of 2019, and then Wilmer Hale was engaged in May of 2020. What was the interplay like between the initial beginning of that, the GAO audit, and then also the Wilmer Hale investigations occurring simultaneously? What input or play was there between the two?
Congressman, I don't believe there was interplay between GAO and Wilmer Hale. There were separate entities looking at separate functions. In the Wilmer Hale example, Wilmer Hale, their career senior members of that organization reviewed allegations against 3 former career senior executives of this office. They made investigative findings to include misconduct on the part of the 3 senior executives. In the case of GAO, that was an independent investigation. In the case of GAO, actually in both cases, we cooperated fully with both organizations. We provided them access to our employees and to our documents, and they reached their conclusions independent of any input from anyone in my organization.
But you agree that they were both obviously highlighting evidence of, or highlighting incidents or allegations of misconduct, and just perhaps flagging morale and other organizational and morale issues, correct?
That's correct.
And can you just let's say, I mean, how are you thinking about, as the leader of this organization, as the Inspector General itself, changing that culture, changing, especially a culture that has seen rapid transformation, both the organizational restructuring that has been undergone under your tenure, but then also, the turnover at the head of that office preceding your time. Can you speak a little bit more about what you're doing and how we can frankly help in those efforts to change that culture, and to, as we begin to also look to implement some of those 21 recommendations?
Sure. So I owed it, Congressman, to the career senior staff in my office. I have 720 dedicated employees. I owed it to them to demonstrate that there's new leadership in this organization and that mistreatment of others and retaliation will not be tolerated and appropriate action would be taken. I basically joined in helping this committee to continue to do robust oversight, regardless of what administration is in place, and I'm going to continue to do that with the committee's assistance.
Right. And do you expect that in the future, the entities like SIGI and those standards we set, that will continue to be the standard that the DHS-OIG is held to?
Yes, we also use some standards, frankly, from the department that are published by OPM, since we're part of the executive branch.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida for 5 minutes, Ms. Dimon.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Kafari, the GAO found that the IG senior leadership has not communicated the criteria it uses to approve or decline proposed work. This would leave, of course, the IG staff unsure why certain projects are approved and other projects are not, resulting in what we all would think is confusion and certainly morale issues, which I've heard that word used earlier today. We know how important it is. I understand that at times the IG has said that his office's work must be data-driven. That makes sense. But this requirement appears to have been applied inconsistently. For example, in July of last year, following the events in Lafayette Square in Portland, I know my colleague, Mr. Swalwell, asked about this somewhat earlier, but leaders on this committee, among others, sought reviews of DHS's use of force. Your office responded that it was opening a review of incidents in Portland, but never addressed the Secret Service use of force in Lafayette Park. According to recent reports from the Project on Government Oversight, your staff even prepared or proposed such a project that would not overlap with the work of other IGs. Makes sense. But you personally declined it. You also declined a report related to what actions the Secret Service took to protect its agents and the public from COVID. According to the Project on Government Oversight, as a result of your refusal to review the incident at Lafayette Square, questions about the Secret Service involvement and other questions remain unanswered. I'm concerned, as I think my colleagues would be on this committee, that in the absence of clear criteria and other considerations, it creates an environment where politics, the politics of the moment, can influence those decisions. So, Mr. Kafari, could you tell me what objective criteria do you rely on did you rely on to decline Congress's request to review the events in Lafayette Park?
Thank you, ma'am. So just so the record's clear, any suggestion by Pogo or by the Washington Post or anyone else that I pull punches on conducting robust oversight of the Secret Service for political reasons is a complete falsehood. Just not true.
Well, I mentioned the Project on Government Oversights. I did not mention the Washington Post. So are you saying that you're referring to the Project on Government Oversight?
Yes, ma'am. I believe
Okay,
there was a
all right,
Washington
thank you.
Post article as well. But since I just so the record's clear, since I was confirmed, I published 5 reports that include oversight of the Secret Service. I just released one today. It's the DHS deployment of law enforcement personnel to Portland, Oregon. I have 4 others that we did within the last year, and I have 4 ongoing projects specifically looking at the Secret Service. Basically,
Specifically at Lafayette Park?
Not at Lafayette Park, no ma'am.
That my question involved their actions at Lafayette Park specifically. Have you looked into, or do you have a report addressing Secret Service involvement, including use of force, protection of their agents and the public at Lafayette Park?
I coordinated with my colleague over in the Department of the Interior, whose Park Police was responsible for security of Lafayette Park. I asked, and he has agreed to take a look at the small footprint of Secret Service's involvement in that matter. I facilitated that IG's access to individuals in Secret Service and the department and the production of documents. I was told yesterday that there will be a section in the Department of the Interior's final report, which would be coming out shortly, dealing with the U.S. Secret Service.
And you feel that's adequate, addressing, or at least looking into, certainly as the IG or the IG's office, do you feel like that's adequate oversight?
Based on my limited resources, it was. We had another IG who was more ingrained in taking a look at the events that occurred there. Just for the record, I've opened an inspection audit involving our communications, as I mentioned, with Health and Human Services today. HHS has asked us to take a look at matters occurring within HHS. They're going to facilitate our access. It's things that we do in the IG community to help one another when we have limited resources.
Young lady's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes the young lady from Florida. Well, I don't see it. Chair recognizes Mr. Pfluger from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the ability to have the hearing today, and I know there's been a lot of discussions on different aspects of of the reports that some of them dated and some of them more recent. But I want to focus on a couple of things. And just because it was just mentioned, can you please elaborate on the investigation with or the report that you just mentioned on HHS and what the office is doing with HHS and communication? It seemed like that was related to the transparency of the operations that are ongoing.
Yes, sir. So that in 2019, I believe it was November, maybe December 2019, we published a report basically looking at the technology that was available to DHS at that time, whether they were using it effectively to track and to merge, to track family units and to merge family units with their minor children. This is an expansion of that now with the new surge at the border. And in the last iteration, we worked with HHS. And in this particular case, HHS is going to ask us to do that with their facilitation. This is like an interoperability of systems between DHS and Health and Human Services. It's the Office of the Refugee Resettlement.
Well, that's great, and I'll be very interested in reading that. We have a facility in Midland, Texas,
Yes, sir.
and we've sent multiple requests, multiple written requests and verbal requests, and haven't received any response yet on how long the facility will be there, who is going to be put into the facility, whether or not they have COVID, how the Office of Refugee Resettlement is actually working to get them to the right place. Very simple things, up to and including the allegation of a sexual assault that occurred there, which we still can't get any answers on. So very interested in that result. I also want to go to the role that the IG plays in ensuring that our Customs and Border Protection agents have the right resources, training, and equipment to do their job on the border. Can anyone please comment on that and whether or not that's being looked at and the mechanism of which we're grading ourselves on that?
Mr. Curry, would you like to do that?
I think he was asking about the IG's role in that.
Okay, so one of Congressman Pfluger, one of the things that we're going to be looking at is during our discussions down on the border, the subject matter experts down there told us that they're having very difficult time backfilling existing vacancies. They're able to draw people from other outstations to come to the southwest border or to go to the southwest border. The problem is their throughput is a hang up at FLETC. So because of the outbreak of FLETC, the training facility in Brunswick, Georgia, they're unable to rapidly keep pace with the vacancy rate and fill those vacancies. So we're doing a review right now of FLETC's ability, the effectiveness of them conducting virtual training to speed up sort of their training qualifications.
Let me reclaim just a little bit of time and expand on that question. Multiple Border Patrol agents have specifically told me that they're not getting the right resources, or they're seeing something in the case of gotaways, hundreds, if not thousands, that are happening across the southern border right now. Are they being heard? Is their voice being heard? And if not, how can the IG help to ensure an immediate course correction to get them the resources, training, and personnel to secure the southern border?
Well, I'm poised to have a meeting with the secretary in a few days and with the deputy secretary to discuss my observations at the border. And I'm sure we're going to have a very good discussion. We've already met twice. He's been very receptive to our inputs, but ultimately that's for the secretary to make a decision.
Well, the fact is that there are folks that have come across on the terror watch list, and that's being communicated by mid-level Border Patrol agents to members of Congress. We see that statement then redacted, and I'm worried about the fact that there's a censoring of information. And so this is the IG's role, is to make sure that anyone in the organization has a voice and has the psychological safety to communicate to the leadership what the issues are. So This needs to happen.
Gentleman's time from
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Texas has expired. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California for 5 minutes, Ms. Barragon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kafari, in December 2019, your office released its findings following an investigation into the death of 2 children in CBP custody in December of 2018. I'm troubled that investigators neglected to even attempt to speak with medical professionals that treated one of the children. Your final public reports were merely 2-page summaries of the deaths that cleared Border Patrol personnel of any wrongdoing, yet failed to look at any systematic issues that might have led to the children's death. One of these summaries included inaccurate information on child's diagnosis, which had to be corrected following a letter sent by this committee. At the committee's July 2020 hearing on the deaths of children in CBP custody, you committed to providing the committee with a report detailing broader recommendations in CBP custody. And to my knowledge, no report.
Ma'am, I think you cut out, at least on my end. I don't know if any other members are able to hear you. Hello?
Yes, were you able to
You're
hear my
back.
question?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I got the beginning of your question, but it seems to relate to my testimony in July of 2020.
Yes, at the July 20 hearing on the deaths of children in CBP custody, you committed to providing the committee with a report detailing broader recommendations about the care of children in CBP custody by the end of the year. To my knowledge, no such report has been issued. What's the delay and when will we see the report?
No delay, ma'am. Actually, we have a draft report that's being reviewed. I'm told by my team that this report should be done at the department. It's the look at CBP's procedures for providing medical care, quality medical care to detained migrants. We should have that out by the summer. And we're using the resources of our medical contract professionals that you provided to us.
Okay, Mr. Kafar, your reports on the 2 children, Jacqueline and Felipe, they took about a year. A 3rd child's death in custody occurred in May of 2019. In our July 2020 hearing, you testified that the investigation into the death was near completion. It's been 9 months since you made that statement and nearly 2 years since the child died, and there's still no report. I understand it's being reviewed, but Congress really needs to be able to see this report and to do it publicly. These are things that are very, very important and that we need to learn from. Do you have an estimation how much longer this report will take?
But ma'am, the 2 reports were published in December, I think December of 2019. And I testified about those 2 closed reports in July of 2020. The report I'm
Correct, and they
mentioning
were
goes to your broader question about the handling and the quality of medical care that's being provided by CBP.
Okay, but there was a. Have you put a report out about the 3rd death?
Third death is
the one of May of 2019. His name was Carlos from Guatemala.
There's no, we don't release investigative reports. We release the investigative summaries, which are the documents that you just referenced for the 2 previous death cases. We will do so in accordance with our agreement with the chairman. And I committed in July to publishing all death in custody by summer. Hello?
Well, I thank the gentlelady for her questions. And
yes,
since Mr. Kafar referenced the chairman.
Making sure we
I'll make
understand
sure-
what's happening.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Chairman, certainly.
Well, I think Ms. Barragon is having trouble.
Mr.
Okay.
Yes,
We're gonna go to Mr. Gardenheimer for 5 minutes until we can get the young lady from California's signal back. Mr. Malinowski, are you there? Well, look like we're having some technical difficulties. I hope we can correct them. But let me thank our witnesses again. They've called some votes, and I was trying to get us through this area. But however, based on the findings, GAO concludes that the work required to address the weaknesses is substantial and extends across the organization. The work amounts to a transformation of the organization's management and operation. Such transformation can be a difficult, complex endeavor. IG Kafari has significant work ahead of him, and based on what I've observed and heard today, I have yet to be convinced that he's up to the task at hand. His reorganization announced on the same day as GAO's draft report strikes me as the shuffling of the deck chairs rather than something that will resolve the challenges. And as Mr. Curry noted, it repeats some of the very same problems GAO identified. This hearing is the beginning of the committee's engagement with the OIG on these issues. Accordingly, the committee will be monitoring your implementation of GAO's recommendation today. Now, Mr. Malinowski, we saw you, but I will yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Torres, if he has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The GAO and Homeland Security Committee have raised serious questions about the integrity, independence, accountability, transparency, and efficacy of the DHS Office of Inspector General. I see the report as a comprehensive indictment of the office. The report essentially portrays the OIG as a sinking ship, and it accuses the Inspector General of constantly rearranging the decks of his organization without any semblance of strategic planning. My first question is about independence. The Homeland Security Committee received an email from a whistleblower who accused you, Inspector General, of mishandling the IM 1015 Facebook group. The email claims that you were concerned about, quote, demands that an interview would impose on senior DHS leadership. Is that whistleblower claim true, yes or no?
Mr. Torres, great visiting with you again. The answer is no.
Okay, the email also claims that you advise your inspectors to, quote, avoid any questions already publicly commented on by those leaders. Is that claim true or false?
Incorrect.
Okay. In August of 2020, the GAO issued a report finding that Acting Secretary Wolf and Acting Deputy Cuginelli were improperly serving in their roles. The GAO referred the matter to the IG. You declined the referral, correct?
I reviewed the referral and declined to take a position.
For what it's worth, for me, it's inexplicable that the OIG would decline a referral regarding the improper exercise of power at the highest echelons of DHS. If the OIG is not willing to investigate the abuse of power at the highest levels of DHS, then what is the Inspector General for? Is it true that you and your office said that you would discuss the GAO referral and a potential investigation with Chad Wolf?
No.
Okay. Now, in your confirmation hearing, Senator Rosen asked you what you would do in the event of a whistleblower retaliation. You testified under oath that you would conduct an investigation, evaluate all the facts, and make a recommendation. The word recommendation is the operative phrase here. Despite promising to make recommendations during your confirmation hearing, you proceeded to announce in the summer of 2020 that you would no longer make recommendations, thereby breaking your promise. If your office found evidence of retaliation against a whistleblower, but fails to recommend reinstatement, do you think that DHS is more likely or less likely to reinstate a wrongfully fired whistleblower in the absence of an OIG recommendation?
Just for the record, I did, as you suggested, make that comment to Senator Rosen. I was basing that comment on my previous work with other IGs. I determined that the inspector, upon review, once I got here, the Inspector General Act actually does not require making a recommendation.
I'm not asking about requirement. I'm just asking if you fail to make a recommendation, if you fail to recommend reinstatement, is DHS more likely or less likely to reinstate a wrongfully fired whistleblower? I'm asking about probability.
I can't comment on probability, sir.
Okay. I mean, I think common sense dictates that DHS is more likely to reinstate if it is recommended explicitly by the Inspector General. According to the former director of the Whistleblower Protection Unit, Brian Balsky, an employee of yours, claims that your office essentially disclosed the identity of a whistleblower to the commandant and vice commandant of the U.S. Coastal Guard. Is it true that your chief of staff gave the commandant and the vice commandant a heads up about the investigation?
I don't know if that occurred, sir.
Is it true that the vice commandant thanked your chief of staff for providing enough information to make the whistleblower identifiable?
I actually don't know.
Can you provide us with a response in writing?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, but you would agree that if the confidentiality of a whistleblower were compromised, that's the kind of breach of trust that would inflict irreparable damage to the integrity of an Inspector General. Would you agree with that assessment?
I agree to protect whistleblowers' identity, yes.
And then finally, during your confirmation hearing, you promised to ensure that the Whistleblower Protection Unit would be robustly staffed. But according to your former director of the Whistleblower Protection Unit, you left the unit understaffed. In December of 2019, Mr. Balsky drafted a memo sounding the alarm about, quote, mission failure at the Whistleblower Protection Unit. Is it true that in response to that warning of mission failure, you waited 4 months before hiring only one staffer? Is that true?
It's true that we were in a budget deficit, and until I received budget allocations, I think we were in a continuing resolution, did not have vacancies available to fill, money to fill vacancies. Once we got a full funding, as Mr. Volsky knows, we moved the Whistleblower Protection Unit from our Office of Special Review back to the Office of Counsel where it belongs, and we detailed and hired now up to 8 attorneys are staffing that office.
I see my time has expired, and Mr. Malowski. Okay. I thank the witnesses for their testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, the committee record shall be kept open for 10 days. Hearing no further business, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torres. Take care. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.